Well, good morning, friends at Orchard. It is a joy and a privilege to be back here in this church. I appreciate Pastor Ken's invitation, and it's so good to be here. I remember this when it was purely an orchard. I remember at one time in the 90s, I had to use my motorcycle to go up and down the rows of trees looking for our family dog that had left our house just up the hill. And I know that this land was held by the Mack family since the 1700s, and they only decided to let go if they could do something that would help the town, like building the kindergarten and building your church. And so it's exciting to see the growth. It's exciting to see the addition being added, and we rejoice with you, not only because our son and daughter-in-law and 5 grandchildren worship here, but lots of family members and friends are here, and so it's a privilege to be back. As you know, I've spent the last 6 years of my ministry supporting Foreman Christian College in Lahore, Pakistan, and I'm on the board of that school, so I do travel over there once a year, as well as I travel around the United States to share about this unique ministry. Pakistan only makes the news when there's bad news, so you may not know much about it, but there are some good news stories like Foreman Christian College. This is a place where men and women, Christians and Muslims, are taught together in an interfaith harmony model where they learn to respect one another and grow in their God-given abilities and callings. Pakistan is unfortunately, though, the home of some Muslim extremists, and members of the Taliban live in Pakistan much like they live in neighboring Afghanistan. And from time to time, there is violence visited upon the Christian community. I can tell you that Christians make up only 2% of this nation, but they are bold for their faith. They are courageous in their devotion to Christ. They stand up even when they've been jailed or personally attacked or when their churches have been bombed. And what they face in that country makes me appreciate even more our safety, our freedoms, our ability to educate our children as we wish. And these are freedoms we should never take for granted. Well, this morning I realized that we may feel like we're living in a very contentious world, and I want to turn to the scriptures to say, what do they have to say to us on the topic of peace? What are the steps to peace that we might take? As the Apostle Paul wrote in his great letter to the Romans in chapter 12, that we're to live at peace with everyone. And it hit me that as we turn to Romans 12, Pakistani Christians would be just as eager, maybe even more eager, to hear what Paul would be saying about peace, because they too live in a contentious land. They're a minority, much like the Christians were a minority in Rome. And if I was preaching over there, I know they'd be listening to, what does Paul say? What does Paul give us as his words of wisdom and advice? We may experience prejudice for our faith here in the United States, but we don't have hot-headed terrorist groups burning down our businesses or bombing our churches. So when Paul wrote this letter to Rome, he wrote to the Christians who were in the capital city of an empire that had put their Lord Jesus Christ to death on a cross. So what he said were heartfelt words, were serious words to a brave minority holding on to their faith in a very contentious time. And to help you hear how Paul would have brought this across to them in their own way, in their own ears, I'm going to start by reading out of the Message translation at the beginning of Romans 12. Let's hear together God's word. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't be so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings out the best from you, developing well-formed maturity in you. And then we'll skip ahead to verse 17. I'll read out of the New International Version now. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you'll heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Lord, open our hearts to what we might learn from your word, that we might be obedient servants to Christ this day. Amen. When you speak on the subject of peace, you have to be very careful. There's lots of nuances to this topic. There's lots of different ways that we can understand or be misunderstood. So I want you to listen very closely as I go through what I believe are the best ways that we can be people of peace in this world today. I also want to start out with a joke because that will often bring more attention and it will engage the audience. And I understand Pastor Ken uses jokes from time to time. So let me start asking this question, particularly of our young people. Now, young people, you may not know, but in this world, we give someone an award if they're known as a person of peace. It's called the Nobel Peace Prize. So having that in mind, who do you think is the most peaceful person in the Disney empire? Which Disney character is the most peaceful person? It's Gaston from Beauty and the Beast because he won the Nobel Prize. See, Belle went off to love the beast. That was her man, not Gaston. Peace, like the beautiful Belle, is elusive, complicated, certainly desirable. Peace is not just peace of mind, and peace is not just absence of war. Peace, or shalom, as we learned from the scriptures, the biblical sense, means being whole, being in a right relationship with God, yourself, your neighbor, your community, and your world. And who wouldn't want to live in a peaceful home, in a peaceful community, attend a peaceful church? I mean, there's a wonderful life-giving sense to finding that peace with everything around you. But there's also a necessary sense of finding that peace with God within you. And so that's why if you look at the first half of Romans, if you look at what Paul is writing in that, his whole letter, you'll understand that he says that we are saved from our sins by grace. We need to understand that all of us have fallen short of the glory of God in the way we've behaved, in the way we've thought, in the way we've acted. And so we come to God finding his grace, finding his forgiveness, and we experience that with the salvation and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Well, now we get to chapter 12 of Romans, and Paul says, well, here's the nitty-gritty. You have to live out this newfound grace. You have to live out this faith in humble and holy and compassionate and gracious ways. In a messed up and contentious world, good is there to overcome evil. Well, how does that happen? And to make it more practical, let's just ask, how do Ukrainian Christians today find peace when their country has been invaded? How do we find peace when we've been insulted for trying to speak the truth in love? How do we find peace if we're trying to serve in a contentious area of the world? If we sit on a school board, if we're trying to build a church in a neighborhood and we know it'll bring more traffic? How do we bring peace to a company when everyone wants a raise and no one wants to work very much harder for it? Peace takes work. It takes spiritual depth. It takes patience. It takes discernment. And yet, Jesus wants us to be involved in peace. He didn't say, blessed are the peace wishers or blessed are the peace lovers. We all love peace. He said, blessed are the peace makers, implying we have an active role when we bring peace to this world. Now you're beginning to think this is a big topic, and how's he going to cover it in the time he has left? And you know how I probably will do this. I'm going to give you 3 different steps that we can take, 3 different ways that we can look and work on peace in our world. And I believe that if we look at Jesus and how he was working at peace, we also have not only the example, but and not only the inspiration, but also the one who empowers us to actively bring love and peace into the world today, to actively step away from aggression and confrontation unless it's necessary, to have the courage to not hit back when someone wants to start a fight or someone wants to invite us to call down thunder and fire from heaven. So let me go back and start with, what are the steps to peace? And when the conflicts present themselves, when 2 or more people are in a power struggle of one sort or another, one of the first questions I like to ask is, am I called to step in and help out? Has Jesus given me a unique position or a special calling to step in to this situation? And should I enlist others who want me to be a part of it? You see, not every fight is our fight. Not every situation is ours to resolve. As a teenager, I remember one time I was at a friend's house, and he and his father were arguing about us going to a ministry event, and I was going to be driving that night. And as the boy and the father were arguing about whether this was wise and whether the dad was ready to let the son go, I just stepped in and said, well, you know, my parents let me stay out till midnight, and I've been a very safe driver all of the 1 year that I had my license at that point. Well, both the father and the son turned to me and said, stay out of this. You're not helping the situation. And I learned right then and there that just because I had an opinion, or just because I had some information, it isn't always welcomed or needed. We don't always have to step in. But there are times when you are the unique person that can help someone, and I certainly saw that when I became a pastor. I had to learn to step in and help out in ways that I felt equipped and called to do. In one church that I served, we had an elderly woman who came to our pastoral staff, and she had a very draining and demanding situation. Her adult children had moved in on her. She thought this would be a temporary situation, but they started to say, well, you're forgetful. Maybe you should have us have authority over your checks. And then they began to take her money, and they were living off of it. They weren't looking for work. They were going out to eat. They weren't giving her any freedoms. They weren't giving her any flexibility. And so basically they had taken over her life, and she felt she was in an intolerable situation for the last 6 months. What were we to do? We decided that we would reach out to a local social worker and have someone else who would be helping us in this situation. We found out what the woman really wanted, which she did want to be living on her own once again and help her children get into work and get into their own apartment. And so we were able to bring resolution by working as a team and stepping in, and finally she had the freedom and the financial wherewithal that she deserved. We were the only one she could turn to. And it was important for us to step in. Is it costly to step in? I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's extremely costly. There's a Christian suburb of Lahore, Pakistan, called Jahanabad that I like to take people to because it had 2 church bombings in 2015. And these churches are on a walled street, and so you can't get into the church courtyard without stepping through a metal gate that has a metal door cut into that gate. And so on Sunday mornings when they have church, they open that door, and there's greeters at the church door, just like there would be greeters in our door. But those greeters have a special role. They don't only just welcome in the faithful, they also hold back the suspicious because they don't know why everyone's coming to church, but it's pretty obvious to Christians with the joy in their face who've come to worship, and sometimes it's obvious who's coming to harm. Well, one day the greeter was this 19-year-old boy, and he saw a suspicious man coming down the street on a hot day with a long cloak on, and something told him to shut the door. So he shut the door, and the young man said, "Let me in. I want to go in the church." He said, "No, you can't go in today." And then he jumped up on the wall, and the greeter grabbed his legs, and he says, "Let go. I have a bomb. I'm going to blow this up." And the greeter said, by the power of the Spirit working in him, "No, I'm not going to let go. You can't go in there." And the bomb went off. Many were hurt, but only one lost his life, that greeter, that day. And today, as you go down that street, his picture is put up as a martyr to the safety of that church. He was a peacemaker who gave his life. And I know this story because I talked to another young man who was going to Foreman Christian College, who was in the courtyard that day, whose life was spared by the sacrifice of his friend. I'm humbled, I'm inspired by brave souls who are willing to work for peace like that. Just remember, though, we're not always called to make that sacrifice. Sometimes you can have others who will help protect you. I remember the police that I called in this town if I had to step into a domestic violence situation. I wanted to go in with them as my partner. I know that Paul called for Roman guards to protect him from the Jews who were trying to harm him when he was under arrest, and he appealed to go to Caesar. And there are times when I go off the campus of Foreman that we're given a cadre of both government and foreman guards to go with us. I'll show you this slide of what they look like. They step in so nobody will mess with us. And I'm glad they're there because the government officers are sent with us because the government doesn't want an international incident. They don't want foreign visitors harmed in their country, and they know that there are terrorists who operate from time to time in various places. And I know when they're there, I don't have to worry about my physical safety, that I'm there to be polite, to be kind, to be an ambassador for Christ in the ministry that I'm doing. Their job is to keep the peace, and they're all business-like about that. But that's what Paul wrote about also in Romans 13. That's the legitimate use of the sword by the government is that they might enact justice and keep the peace. Well, stepping into conflicts is costly. We don't have to step into every conflict, though. None of us are fighting in Ukraine today. We're praying for them, but it's not our fight. Few of us will solve other people's family problems. We need to pray for them, but it usually has to be worked out between those people having a conflict. But there is another way that we can be peacemakers in the world today. And one of the options we have in conflictual situations is to step aside or step away. When Mary and Joseph heard that Herod wanted to kill their infant son, what did they do? They fled to Egypt. They stepped away. They became refugees, and that is something that many have practiced to avoid conflicts in the world today. Right before I married Deb, when I was still engaged to her, I was a volunteer missionary in Ethiopia, in Africa. And when I was there, a military coup took over the government, and they became antagonistic to Americans. They kicked out all American institutions, including the U.S. Embassy. And Cuban soldiers came to prop up the government, the military who had taken over. So the American missionaries at that point decided that they needed to withdraw because there was no longer an embassy to stand up for us. There was nobody who could protect us and ensure our safety. And so I became a refugee. I had to immediately book a flight out, and I went to Kenya, and I went to Egypt, and I came home and planned a wedding with Deb. But that situation made me always sensitive to refugees, to someone who has to leave a conflictual situation, taking just what they can pack and take with them at the moment. But even Jesus said, when persecution mounts in one town, go to another town. It's not your fight to solve. Move to where you can go next and productively share the gospel. That's good advice for us sometimes. There may be conflicts in business or a neighborhood or a family group that we just can't solve. Sometimes we need to withdraw or step away. There are other times where we need to help people who they themselves have to be fleeing. They themselves need to be stepping away. The last church I served in helped a family from Syria back in 2016 when the Syrian war made it that many needed to leave their homeland to save their families and to keep alive. And they had to take them in. They had to find jobs for them. They had to find a place to live, clothes that were appropriate. They had to set up medical appointments, start language training. Basically, when the U.S. government accepts refugees and churches cooperate, there's about 6 to 12 months, and that family's supposed to be on their own. Well, that church and that community was so successful in settling this refugee family that now This past year, they took in an Afghani family of 11 family members who left when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. You know, there are those situations where people are going to have to back out of them and flee. And maybe it's not helping refugees. Maybe you've helped someone have a place to sleep at your house for a little while. Or maybe you've helped someone get out of a troubling situation or relationship. Stepping away from those who would do violence to us, who threaten injustice for us, is a serious way to be a peacemaker in this world. And may the Lord give us wisdom in those situations if we face them. So we step in or we step away. There's a final step I want to encourage you to take, and that is when you're in conflict, when someone's created a situation where you feel threatened or you have had difficulty or you have taken it on the chin, maybe we should be stepping back and forgiving. It's not a natural reaction, though, is it? Someone criticizes us unfairly. What's the natural response? Be defensive. Criticize them back. Someone cuts in a line at a busy airport. What do we want to do? We want to shove them back to the end of the line. Someone hurts a person we love. We want to hurt them back. It's just a natural instinct. The eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But to love our enemies, to pray for those who persecute us, that takes supernatural help. That's not the natural response. It takes the help of those, the one who could command angels and come down off the cross, but he didn't. Instead, he prayed what? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He wasn't just the King of Kings on that cross. He wasn't just the King of the Jews. He was also the Prince of Peace, the way he showed us that he was able to give grace to even those who tormented and put him to death. John Stott, who has taught the scriptures all over the world, said something profound about Romans 12 I learned as I went into this passage to prepare this sermon. Paul's advice to not take revenge on our enemies, but feed them when they're hungry and give them drink when they're thirsty, does something very different to this world. He said, if we hit back someone who hits us, we've doubled the amount of evil in the world. But if we answer evil with forgiveness and supernatural kindness, we've added more good to the world, and we outweigh the evil, and it diminishes in its might. Think about that the next time you have an angry customer. Try to be exceedingly kind when you have someone nasty that you have to deal with. Be the best you can to that neighbor that pushes all your buttons. Step back from your first reaction and step into God's grace for you and try to show that grace by forgiving your fellow man. If we do that, I think the world is going to take one step closer to being a place of peace. So wherever you are today, if there's something you need to step into or something you need to step aside from or maybe something you need to step back and forgive, I invite you to pray a prayer that's been prayed by Christians for many centuries, the prayer of St. Francis. Let us pray that God would make us instruments of peace, that we might overcome what is still evil in this world with God's great goodness. Please join me in this prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's discord, union. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. Where there's sadness, joy. O Master, let me not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that one receives. It is in pardoning that one is pardoned. It is in dying that one is raised to eternal life through the power of Jesus alive in me. Amen.